All right, we're live here at Buffalo Trace Distillery for another episode of Whiskey Wednesday. And sorry we've had some technical difficulties getting online today, but nevertheless, we're here. And, Joshua, the one thing that obvious, Harlan's not with us. I know he had a really important place to be at the same time, so let's have some fun with this.
Sure, absolutely. We'll miss Harlan, but we'll try to have a little fun while we're at it.
Great.
So today we're going to talk about Old Charter Oak. This is exciting because it's a brand that's been around a long time, has this rich history, but it looks and feels a little bit different these days. And so I'm excited to dive into it and talk about what we're doing with it these days. But before we get into the whiskeys, let's talk about the history of the brand. The Old Charter brand was launched by the Chinkapen brothers in 1874 here in Kentucky. And they named their bourbon in honor of the Charter Oak tree. This was a 500 plus year old oak tree that was famous for being used to hide the Royal Charter of Connecticut from the British in the 1600s. So it's a brand that paid homage to this historical moment in our country's history. And today we try to honor that history, but it's also today really about exploring and celebrating the role oak plays in making great American whiskey and bourbon. And so as you guys have heard, Harlan and Drew over the last several months talk about this over and over again, but oak is really a big deal when it comes to making great bourbon and American whiskey, so much in fact that it's responsible for 100% of the whiskey's color and well over half the flavor. And so I'm excited to get into our first 4 releases of this reinvigorated brand. Talk about what makes each one special, unique, and different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we do have some questions. We've seen this come up before, but we know that the distillery has a really extensive experimental program. And does the Old Charter Oak, did it come out of that program? I know I've heard that, but that's a question I'd love for you to answer for us.
Yeah, great question. So we do have this experimental team and program here at Buffalo Trace Distillery, and it's really a part of our core DNA. Our motto at the distillery is honor tradition, embrace change. And the embrace change part is where our experimental team and program sort of step in. And so, that team meets a couple times a year. And the goal is to really just to continue to innovate, think about what haven't we tried, what should we be trying, with the ultimate goal to simply make better whiskey tomorrow than we did yesterday or today. And we explore all different types of things. But one of the things we looked at was, let's look at different ways to explore oak in this setting. By law, bourbon has to be aged in a new charred oak container or barrel. Now, what the law doesn't say is it needs to be aged in a new American white oak barrel. Yet, over 99% of the bourbon made today, and most of the bourbon we make here at Buffalo Trace, is aged in American white oak for good reason. The barrel works great in holding whiskey for long periods of time, adds great flavor and color. But wouldn't it be fun if we tried different types of oak? Oaks from different parts of the world, different parts of the country, different species of oak. And so we had this idea, 15 plus years ago, and we started laying some experiments down. And some of those early experiments are what we're going to talk about today in some of these bottles here in front of us. So it was a revitalized brand. It was a brand that we've had for a long time, and we thought that some of those experiments would be best utilized in this brand, since the brand was originally about this famous oak tree. And so this brand was born out of that program.
Yeah, and I'm noticing you're talking about how important the barrel is to color and flavor, but I'm looking, even on the camera here, I can see all the different colors of the whiskey in front of me. Each one looks a little different.
Yeah, so in front of us we have 4 different whiskeys, which we'll get into. But each one of these are the same mash bill. They were aged for similar time frames, 9 to 12 years, and they're bottled at similar proofs, 90 to 93 proof, so very close. Yet you see big color differences between these whiskeys, and that's all because the oaks that was used to age these whiskeys are all different. So why don't we get into it?
Yeah, let's do that. And you know what? As you're starting, it reminds me of grapes. The vines growing in different areas in the valleys and different places around the world, and those grapes taste different. There's no reason to think that a tree that then becomes a barrel wouldn't impart different flavors as well.
100%. Different types of tree. They grow in different areas and different climates and different terroirs all around the world. So therefore, they're going to impart different flavors on the whiskey. So The first one we're going to talk about is over here on the end. It's Mongolian Oak. This was our first release in this series. We released it in fall of 2018. We took our sort of flagship BT1 rye bourbon mash bill, same mash bill used in Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare and George T. Stagg, and we put it in a new charred Mongolian oak barrel for 10 years. So this barrel came from a tree that grew in Mongolia, so all the way across the world.
Amazing.
It rested in our warehouses here in Frankfort, Kentucky, and I think we had 10 of these barrels, and after 10 years, 3 of them were empty, and the other 7 had something like 70% loss from evaporation. So we found out pretty quick that Mongolian oak isn't a very efficient barrel at holding liquid. Yet, what whiskey we did have left was really interesting. Right off the bat, you can see a very light color. You might think this is a sort of mild and lighter whiskey, but it tricks you because as soon as you go on those, you get this bold, like dry cedar kind of note, like some pepper, with a little bit of the sweet aromatics you would expect from bourbon, and it's really a unique whiskey and sort of was a great first addition, to this series because it sort of proved the point that the barrels matter. Mm-hmm. And so as you taste it, you get this spearmint, this dry cedar, and this sort of herbal note. Very different. This whiskey is very similar to something like an Eagle Rare. It's a 10-year-old standard rye bourbon mash bill. The only difference is, bottled at 90 proof, the only difference is it was in a new Mongolian oak barrel instead of a new American white oak barrel. And it tastes completely different than something like Eagle Rare.
A great side by side if anybody's following along or at a bar and they have one of these, to taste it next to like an Eagle Rare, something that's about the same age, same proof.
It would be a great control, but completely different whiskey. And so that was a lot of fun. Well, after we did that one, in the spring of 2019, we released our second release, which is French Oak. So this was the same BT1 rye bourbon mash bill, aged in a new charred French oak barrel for 12 years. And so a little more time in the barrel, and you can see a very different color, almost like this amber, kind of hue. Beautiful, gorgeous looking whiskey. And we bottled this at 92 proof. And I have to say, we were absolutely thrilled with the way this whiskey came out. Very different from Mongolian oak. We didn't lose as much whiskey, so that was a plus.
Yeah.
And this was really heavy on the sweet aromatics, just a lot of vanilla, like these berries, and then the complexity that the oak provides, that little bit of dryness from sitting in that barrel for 12 years. So it was an absolute favorite, and I would just sort of classify this as like this luxurious whiskey.
That you've answered a lot of questions already, and some that we're getting is we know these are hard to come by, but I think you answered one reason why, especially Mongolian oak. If we have only 10 barrels, you said, and 3 were empty, and so these experiments can be small, large, all different sizes. But Josh Turin on Buffalo Trace Distillery's Facebook page does say French oak is delicious. He loves that one. So
yeah, I'm glad he liked it. Yeah. And you're right. When we put these in the barrel in 2006 or 2007 or 2008, we didn't know what we were going to do with them. They were experiments, and so some of these we didn't have many barrels of, and you never know what's really going to happen. 10 plus years later. I will say though that they have been limited so far to date, but we're really excited about this program and this brand, and we're going to continue to lay more whiskey down. We're expanding. Unfortunately, it just takes time. So expect to see more of these and expanding into new markets and seeing more of these over as the years come along.
Great.
So let's move to the third release. Now this was released in the fall of 2019. This is Canadian Oak. So this is once again our BT1 rye bourbon mash bill that we put in new charred Canadian oak barrels for about 10 years. And once again, a very different whiskey. Obviously, this oak tree grew in a much different climate, colder climate, tighter ring structure, slower growth in general, and it's actually magical. The whiskey that sort of was the output of this process, and so.
Yeah, as you're tasting there, I think just keep it in mind, every nuance of a tree or the wood that's harvested to make the barrels, like you just brought up, a tighter ring growth versus one that had a quicker growth cycle and maybe a warmer climate, that's going to change the taste of the whiskey as well.
100%. If the same tree was planted in South Alabama, it would have give a completely different characteristic to the whiskey. But this one is absolutely stunning. It is I don't know if there's something weird there, and I'm thinking Canada maple syrup, but I get a lot of caramel, and I get this like sweet maple syrup note to it. It's an absolute favorite, and we were once again just really pleased with how it came out after 10 years. It's a like beautiful, nuanced Kentucky straight bourbon.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So let's move on to the last of the bunch here. This is Chinkapen Oak. So we released this actually in spring of 2020, and Chinkapen Oak it's the first time our first 3 releases were barrels from different countries, but this is actually a different species of oak here in America. So it grows in sort of the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic. It's a different species of American white oak, the Chinkapen Oak. And once again, it sat there. This one, I think, sat in the barrel for 9 years. And another nuance about this whiskey is the staves for this barrel air dried longer than normal. So they sat out and air dried for 24 months before we built the barrel. And so that's actually going to provide another characteristic and nuance to the whiskey and make it a little bit different. But once again, turned out really well. So let's have a taste.
As you're tasting there, I think about where that Chinkapen tree grew, but also like you're saying, the air dry time, that's a whole nother climate environment that wood is exposed to, imparts even more flavor. Like you said, it's just fascinating. I think Old Charter Oak is just a class on how important wood is and how important the barrel actually is, and you guys have really proven that by bottling these whiskeys in different barrels from a different place on the planet. And I think you've answered it. Yes, it matters. It matters where that tree came from and where that barrel was made. So
100%.
Yeah.
And this Chinkapen Oak is fantastic. Spearmint, on the nose and up front in the palate, and then a lot of honey. So that beautiful sweet honey note, and then with this like interesting sort of fresh herb kind of note on the back half of the palate. So once again, a completely different experience. The only difference, in this whiskey is the barrel that we use to mature the whiskey in. And so, if you ever have the opportunity at a great whiskey bar or whatnot, or at a friend's house, I know these are harder to come by, but if you can ever, sort of do a vertical or side by side, I think you'll really get the point, and it's a lot of fun to do that. And so that's where we are today, in this lineup. And actually, our most recent release was a second release of the French Oak. That went out here in the fall, and so look out for that out in your stores or whiskey bars or whatnot.
Yeah, that's great. And when we're talking about the French Oak and we have that second release, is that something that you can compare, the first release to the second release and even get a different flavor?
Yeah, there'll be a lot of similarities,
Yeah.
but every batch will be different, and so I bet you if we did a side by side of our first release of French Oak to the latest, it would be slightly different because they're very small batches, and there'll certainly be some differences between the two.
Yeah, and you've answered some questions there. We've had some questions about what's next, what's the most recent, what's to come, and there's a big expansion here at the distillery, and we know you're laying more barrels down of every brand, and I guess that's true for this brand as well.
Yeah, we just talked about our most recent release, but look, we have really high hopes for this brand, and we have a lot of fun stuff up our sleeve, and so I think there's going to be a lot of fun releases over the coming years. Really, when it comes to this idea of exploring different types of oak, there are all different styles of oaks around the world and around the country, and whether it's that oaks from different country or different species of oak, or even oaks from different states and here in the United States, I think there are plenty of opportunities in front of us, and so we want to explore that. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and we're pleased with how these have come out.
Yeah, and it seems like it's really unlimited. You think about the age of the tree, and like you said, does a tree that makes a barrel that was grown in Kentucky taste different than Alabama? I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to new releases coming down the road too. Joshua, we're over 15 minutes. We always try to keep you just for a few. Any closing words or statements or anything before you go?
No, definitely. If you guys want to learn more about the brand, go to oldcharteroak.com or check out. The brand's also on Instagram, Facebook, and so check it out, learn more. Keep your eyes open, and as always, we're going to continue to make more, and we certainly appreciate you guys tuning in.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Joshua.
Thank you.